what are the key phases that a product typically goes through?
So I would like just to take a step back and talk about something that I worked through called the Double Diamond Framework. And it really starts with discovery and definition of the problem that you're trying to solve.
Now, when let's say I've got the idea for some product, how do I validate whether this brings value for our customers? Are there any specific frameworks?
Yeah. So the first thing that I would say is for any of the listeners out there, look up Teresa Torres's book, Continuous Discovery Habits. It is a fantastic novel on not only validating what you're building, but also continuously generating new ideas to validate. And it really starts with the customer. So lots of interviews, lots of surveys.
Are there any key lessons that you've learned from the past product launches?
The first thing that you want to do is really drive alignment. And what I have found is setting kind of clear objectives for this launch. So like what does success look like from the launch? Are we trying to get new users? Are we trying to drive additional engagement? Is there some other KPI that we're looking at? So it's really important to say, hey, this is kind of like the North Star of this launch, and this is what we're driving to.
Hold up. Before we dive in, let's give a shout out to Appmixer, the game changer in SaaS integrations. Appmixer is a next-gen integration platform with an embeddable automation designer and a unique self-hosted offering. If scaling native integrations for your SaaS feels like a constant challenge, or if you're tired of sending users to third-party tools like Zapier, it's time to check out Appmixer and step into the future of SaaS integrations. And that's exactly what this podcast is all about, tackling the tough day-to-day challenges of product management. Each episode, I sit down with product management heroes who face these challenges every day. I ask the questions, they bring the practical answers. Without further ado, let's see who's joining us today. Hi everyone. Today I'd like to welcome Mr. Chet Thomas, Principal Product Manager at Aiwyn. Thank you for joining us, Chet. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing great, Yuri. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm super excited for our chat today.
Perfect. So today's topic is the journey from idea to launch, a deep dive into the lifecycle of SaaS products. So let's dive in right away, Chet. What do you say? The first question I've got here is if you could walk us through the journey from an initial idea to the launch of a SaaS product. What are the key phases that a product typically goes through?
Yeah, fantastic. So I would like just to take a step back and talk about something that I worked through called the Double Diamond Framework. And that's something that a lot of product managers are probably familiar with. If you're not, it's just an idea of being able to define the problem and solution space in a very prescribed way. And it really starts with discovery and definition of the problem that you're trying to solve. So, this would be the pain points that your customers are having, but it doesn't always have to be, a pain. It can also just be an opportunity to, innovate or bring an extreme amount of value to your customers. And that's kind of that first phase where you're really doing diverging thinking and you're, talking to customers, capturing a lot of ideas, understanding, exactly what's keeping them up at night or, what's causing them issues in their day to day, or maybe just helping them see around a corner that they're not looking around currently. And then from there, you kind of go into the convergent thinking in that first diamond. And that's where you're really like taking all of these ideas that you've captured during that discovery phase, and you're really coming down to like, hey, what problem within this problem space or what opportunity within this opportunity space are we going to tackle? What's going to be our next move with this product? Or, even you can apply this same process just to a feature. It doesn't have to be a 0 to 1 product. It can be, an improvement on an existing product, for example. And then the second diamond in that double diamond framework is going to be your design and deliver phase. So this is where you're creating prototypes, getting feedback from customers, making sure that you're really nailing the problem they're trying to solve from that initial process. And you're able to really drill in and make sure that, hey, we want to validate what we think we're building for you guys is really going to bring the value that you're looking for. And then it goes directly into that delivery phase where you're really taking kind of all of these different prototypes and things that you've put together in that convergent phase in that second diamond, and you're able to really drill down and say, hey, this is what we're building. These are the requirements. This is the AC, the acceptance criteria. You get it over to the development team, and you're actually delivering what you said you were going to build. And throughout this entire process, Yuri, it's not just product managers. Some folks say the product managers are the CEO of the product. I don't really prescribe to that. I really believe that it is a three-way ownership of the product between the product manager, the design lead, and the tech lead. And all three of those personas within that process kind of have their own responsibilities. The product manager is really in charge of the viability for the business and the value to the customer. So we want to make sure that this is something that the business can handle financially. It matches the vision of the business. It's in the same area that we want to play as a business. And then you also want to make sure that, hey, we're bringing a significant amount of value to the customer that they're willing to pay us for. Because at the end of the day, we can build a lot of great software, but if we're not making money on it, the business isn't going to stick around, and that's not good for the business, obviously. And that's also not great for the customer because this great solution that you've built isn't going to stay. The design lead during that process makes sure everything's usable for the customer. So we can over engineer things sometimes if you just put a product manager and an engineer in a room. So it's great to have a really strong design lead there to help you through this process as well. And then the tech lead makes sure that what we're building is feasible. A great example of that is, all of this new AI functionality that exists in the market today. There's some really great applications for that within product, like real applications today. That being said, you want to make sure that you can build what you're committing to. So having a strong interaction between those three parties during this, discovery, definition, design, and delivery phase, you want to make sure that all three of those parties are heavily involved through that. And then, of course, once the product is done and ready to launch to customers, so we've released it at the end of delivery, but now, of course, we want to actually, bring it to customers. You want to make sure that you've got your product launch process down great. So you want to be able to, organize webinars, demos, show up at industry events, do PR, things of that nature to really get the word out there about your new product. And that's both to existing customers and to just the external market as well. So you want to make sure you're serving both of those. And if it's a 0-to-1 product and you don't have any customers, you really, really need to lean in on that launch methodology to make sure that you're really getting what you have out in front of the market. And then from there, it's just really a big feedback loop. You can kind of think of this whole process as a flywheel, because once we've gone from idea to product, you want to make sure that you're continuously iterating on that product, because there's always going to be more problems that your product can solve. You can continue to extract more value out of your customer base by solving more problems for them. And that leads to better outcomes for the business.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, we started actually with I think having a design lead and tag lead and a product manager at the same time, I think we are already kind of far way down the road of building the product. Usually starts with just a CEO and maybe a technical CTO if the CEO is not that two people in one. So how good of product managers are these CEOs? Like, have you joined a company where you were taking the product management from the CEO's hands? What problems have you seen, or can you share some experience on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So in obviously what I was speaking to earlier was you've got a robust product team available. Back to this situation where it's just a founder and potentially like a technical founder. So you've kind of got your market facing guy or gal, and then you've got your more technical, folks in the business. Maybe that's your technical CTO. That does not change the fact that there is still the role of the product manager, the designer, and the tech lead in that process. And those four things that I mentioned earlier, the viability, the value, the usability, and the feasibility, all of those answers or all of those questions still must be answered, even if we're just putting that on the plate of a CEO and a CTO. So I just want to make that point before I jump too deeply here. But yes, absolutely. And my first product management experience, actually. So I'm an engineer by education. So I started my career in engineering and built automated control systems in the pharmaceutical industry. which was super fun, really put me into a place of systems thinking and thinking of end to end about how things work. And then I was exposed to the accounting industry through my wife, who's a CPA. And she was working with a practice management solution that had just been acquired by a very successful CEO, Carl Co. Carl's a fantastic guy, fantastic professional. Loved working with Carl. And he recognized very quickly that this business that he acquired was just kind of was just kind of in autopilot. They weren't building new things. They had a great customer base, super, super happy customers, but it was a legacy product. So it was something that, they didn't have anything in place that was a cloud-based application or anything that was more modern. And the customers were hungry for that. That was going to be the next phase of growth for that business, would be enabling that type of application. And the CEO realized very quickly, hey, I don't have that skill set. I acquire businesses, I grow them, and then I sell them. And what he realized to grow that business was he needed to get a product person in the house to help take that requirement off his plate so he could focus more on growing the business financially. So he brought me in and I was able to help him launch the product management organization within that business. And it was really just a fantastic process for me to kind of go from ground zero of product management, where there wasn't really a product function. There wasn't really anyone focused on product. It was mainly focused just on the technology or the business facing or the market facing side of the business. So that was a really exciting opportunity for me to step in and say, hey, this process that we described earlier of discovery, define, design, and deliver, develop, depending on the infographic that you're looking at, they can kind of change those D's up. That still had to happen. So he left that to me to step into the business and help define what that looked like for the business. And it takes a really strong personality to do that. You have to be willing to push back on the CEO. If you believe something is right, you need to be able to stand up for it. And hopefully, you've at least got some data to back it up, or at least some strong hypotheses to back it up. But yeah, that's absolutely a situation that you'll run into in a startup experience where it's, there's not really someone focused on product, or maybe the CEO is very much the product manager. This is their baby, this is their vision. And that's another experience that I've had where I had a CEO who was a very strong product person. And he kind of, you could tell that there was a little bit of resistance to let things go and build that trust to say, hey, I'm going to kind of allow somebody else into the business to help drive the direction of what I've built over the last 5 years. And that comes with its own set of challenges, because instead of coming in and just being trusted to build the product management processes within the business, you have to really focus on building trust with that product focused person, so they really believe that you can be a partner to them. So it's kind of two situations that you can run into in that situation that you mentioned earlier, where you've got the CEO and the CTO. The CEO is either going to be more market focused, which comes with its own set of challenges, or they're very, very much product focused, which comes with its own set of challenges. So yeah, I've dealt with both of those situations in my career.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Now, when let's say I've got the idea for some product, or an idea to improve an existing product. How do I validate whether this brings value for our customers? Are there any specific frameworks you touched on a framework that you like for building SaaS products before? But can we focus on this validation? How does it work? Can you maybe be specific
Absolutely.
on some examples that you went through?
Yeah. So the first thing that I would say is, for any of the listeners out there, look up Teresa Torres's book, Continuous Discovery Habits. It is a fantastic novel on not only validating what you're building, but also continuously generating new ideas to validate. So it has both of those functions in one process. So that to me has been a really powerful tool in my tool set. And it really starts with the customer. So lots of interviews, lots of surveys. I'm doing customer calls at least a couple hours a week And that sounds like a big investment
Mhm.
because it is a big investment, but it also comes with an amazing amount of ROI because you're able to not only generate ideas, which is important because those need to be validated, but you're also able to work with them to refine those ideas. So we're able to say, hey, like, this is the problem that you think you're facing. Let's validate before we come up with solutions. Let's validate that this is a valuable problem to solve. And that's all done through conversations with the customer. And a really effective tool that you can use during that, once you've done some interviews, you've gotten some perspective on what their problems are, you kind of think that you're going in the right direction. Rapid prototype development with Figma or other tools like that is an absolute godsend because it's very difficult for non-technical customers to get on the phone with a product manager and just kind of talk ad hoc. Because what's going to happen is you're going to end up just getting a lot of, oh, I would love it if it did this or did that. And that's not super, super helpful to you because then you have to say, okay, well,
Mhm.
how do I make that work in a product, right? A really powerful tool is to come with, say, hey, I've got a clickable prototype of what we've been discussing and some possible solutions of how we could tackle these problems that we've discovered together or address the opportunities that we've discussed together. So what I'll typically do is I'll come with 2 or 3 different versions of solutions just in a clickable prototype format, very much kind of low fidelity. So it doesn't, you don't necessarily want to make it a super polished thing because then you can get caught up on positions of buttons or colors or kind of the location of things on the screen. You want it to just more so indicate the direction that you're going with your solution. So I cannot
Mhm.
advocate enough for prototypes and getting those prototypes in front of customers and prospects as early as possible and as often as possible. Another great thing is just kind of doing some experiments within the market. So going back to that conversation earlier on product launch and getting in front of doing PR announcements and going to events and things like that. Another great thing that you can do in those channels is actually test new product ideas. So you can launch a kind of an idea for a product for what's coming, almost like a dark launch kind of thing, and just see what sort of interest that you're building in it. Like, do people want to join your wait list? Do people show interest in it whenever you're at events and you're talking to them in person? Another really effective tool is to use a call to action within the product. If it's an existing product and it's just a new feature, you can actually say, hey, like, click here for this new feature, and that feature doesn't actually go anywhere. It just pops up and it says maybe coming soon or something like that, but you're able to identify using product telemetry tools like Pendo, for example, what customers are clicking on this, when did they click on it, what did they do before they clicked on it. So you can kind of get an idea of, hey, people are interested in this, they definitely think that it would provide them some value based on what they're seeing on their screen. And then last but not least, you cannot ignore your competitors. That's a strong mark. That's a strong signal for validation. If they're building things, you can't just assume that they're doing good product management though. So you don't want to just go build what they're building. But if you're hearing from your prospects or hearing from your customers about specific features that competitors have, you definitely don't want to get in a feature war. But what it can do is it can give you some insight into what problems that your customers are having that they're interested in solving, that they're seeing elsewhere and other in your competition, and you can use that to inspire you to help build better products. So I always like to say, and it's not my term, I can't even remember where I heard it, it was years ago. I'm customer inspired or competitor inspired. I'm not competitor obsessed. I'm not obsessive over what they're building, but I can certainly be inspired by what they're building for sure. And
Mhm.
if you want
Mhm.
just like a specific framework, the lean startup, that's kind of like the rapid prototyping and getting it out in front of folks quick. It really follows that methodology. I don't love the, move fast and break things, specifically in the industry I work in, which is accounting. If we break things, that has a tremendously negative impact on not only the firm, but also their clients. So we do have to be a bit careful from that perspective. But as far as just putting prototypes and things out in front of customers like that, um, often, and that don't be afraid of negative feedback. Just let them know that, hey, these are ideas. We'd love to work with you guys on this, and customers really, really appreciate that. They like to be pulled into that process. So let your customers tell you whenever you're ready.
Mm, mm. You mentioned you're spending a lot of time on calls with your customers. Like, what's the percentage of time you allocate to that, and maybe also what's the ratio between um, let's say the feedback from your customers that you gather on those calls, and then the data that you get directly from the product, as you mentioned, like you're launching some new feature and you just put it to the product so that they can try it out, and there are some products for that to track what was the usability of that, and so on.
Yeah, great question. So I would say I spend about 10% of my week on customer calls. So if I'm working a 40-hour week, that's about 40 hours or 4 hours of calls with customers. So not an
Hmm.
insignificant amount of time. It's a good chunk of your calendar for sure. And again, I just go back to the ROI on that 10% is tremendous because you're getting in a tremendous amount of insight from that customer into what you should be building next. Where are they finding value? Where are they maybe lacking some value in your current solution? So I can't overstate the value of those customer interviews and those discovery sessions with customers. I would say that the use case for the customer feedback that we're getting in discovery versus the product telemetry that we're getting from the product itself using, like a adoption and usage platform like Pendo, it's different use cases, and I can explain that. So during discovery, I'm getting ideas for product that has not been built yet, and obviously I can't track something in Pendo that has not been built yet. So I take the discovery route. I always focus on the customer, what they're telling me, and then on the validation of what we've built is working the way we want it to work, and that like the problem solution is, we've the problem solution fit has been achieved. I want to actually see usage metrics coming from Pendo. I want to see, or from another product like Pendo. I want to see how they're using it day to day. I want to see their user flows. I want to see maybe any frustrations that they're having from a user experience perspective. And I also want to see time to value. Whenever they log in, are they able to do those key activities that are really going to help them get the value out of the application? And we also absolutely can use that data as well to fold back into ideas for improvements for user experience and things of that nature. Or if you see customers using the product in a way that is a little different than you intended, that's also a really strong signal of like, hey, maybe there's a purpose-built feature that we could build around this situation where they're using the product in a way that we didn't expect. That can also provide you with some insight into what you can build next as well without having to do discovery with the client, with the customer.
Hmm. Hmm. Now, can we? I think you partially already answered that, but can we maybe dig deeper on like as a product leader, or maybe as a CEO of that SaaS product company, you've got some vision, some clear vision. Where would you like to take the product? And then you're getting feedback on like we're missing that feature and that feature. How do you kind of incorporate that into one and decide whether to kind of stick to your vision, the way you envision your product, compared to what your customers say?
Yeah, so obviously that can be a tough balance, right? Because we may have a vision of the world that is just fundamentally different than what the customer is doing today. And a lot of times the features that they're requesting from you, if they're just giving you like a list of features that they want, are really just aligning with their current processes. So what you need to do in that situation is it goes back to just talking to the customer and having those conversations with them honestly about, hey, I understand that you want this feature. What is the problem that you're trying to solve whenever you're asking for this feature? Because what they may be asking for, you might not need to deliver that exact feature. It may be something else that's slightly different that fits better into your product vision. Or maybe what they're asking for fits perfectly into your product vision. And we got an MVP out there and we just didn't have that feature, and it's something that needs to be built, and we need to prioritize those kind of like threshold features to be able to really make sure that we're going to be able to deliver this application in a specific category and be competitive. That is absolutely something that happens. And again, I don't ever advocate for getting into a feature war, or just basically getting into the build trap, like Melissa Perry calls it, where you're just kind of building whatever your customers are asking for, and you just kind of become like an outsourced dev shop. So you
Mm.
absolutely want to keep your vision in mind. But I think that you should have like a kind of a loosely held conviction around like specifically what you're building to achieve your vision. And I think that's probably one of the biggest issues I've seen in this situation is visions are a lot of times not truly a vision. You know, they may be like a pre-prescribed set of features that the CEO felt like we needed to build. And that's not a vision. A vision is, you know, kind of the future state, how things could be. And there is usually a wide variety of features and application capabilities that can help achieve that vision. So I think making sure that your vision first and foremost is well defined and, you know, formulated in the way that a vision should be. I think that also makes that entire process a little bit easier as well. But it always, always, always comes back to the customer, because you may find whenever you get into the market, what you thought you wanted to build or the vision that you saw may not be what your customers need. And that's okay. You know, that's why you're allowed to pivot. You're allowed to change your perspective. It's all okay. So it's definitely a balance, and you should never ever just take your customers' requests at face value, depending on the feature. You know, there may be times where it's like, hey, this is a no-brainer. We got to build it, right? You kind of intuitively whenever that's the case. But if they're asking
Hmm.
just for a long list of features, drill in and ask why. It's always just about the why. Why do they want it? What problem are they trying to solve? Are there other alternative ways we can solve what they're asking for, by not without building exactly what they're asking for? So that's kind of the process I take that through.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, I think there are some companies that maybe just, are building these, like, continue developing the product from the desk without actually discussing the upcoming features or the overall vision for the product itself. Um, they just build it without really discussing these things with the customers. So you would say that's really a wrong approach, right? I mean, like, are you, when you have that vision and you're communicating that with the client, maybe you can excite them with what's coming, right? And um yeah, like, so do you also do that, that you have that vision, and you know where you want the product to be in the future, and you sit on the calls with customers, and you're sharing these things with them, and you're checking how they're reacting
Absolutely.
to what you're saying, and so on.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Hmm.
When a customer buys your product, they're not just buying a product. They're buying into the vision. They're buying into the community around your product. They're buying into the talent of your people. There's so much more than just a category of application or a set of features that they're buying from your business whenever they become your customer. And without them seeing where you're going, there is no way that they can possibly build their own tech stack internally around that. You know, they need to know what your aspirations are from a product perspective to be able to effectively plan their technology strategy, in the coming years. So communication of that vision, not only to validate the vision, to kind of like you said earlier, just make sure that there's some excitement or at least some affinity with the vision, see some heads nodding. That is incredibly important, but also just down tactically, it is super important for them to know where you're going, like not just from the vision, but also, road mapping. We use a JPD, Jira Product Discovery, for our road mapping tool. And we're able to show our customers kind of a now, next, later view. We don't, it's not hard, fast rules. It's not carved in stone. We don't give them specific dates because we don't want to be held to dates and again become kind of that future factory. We want to be able to shift things around if we need to, because we need to be able to act rapidly to whenever there's new technologies in the industry or in the environment. For example, AI. I don't think anyone could have possibly guessed how tremendously fast the adoption of LLMs was going to be. And if you had some pre-prescribed 2-year roadmap that you had already committed to customers, you're kind of in handcuffs and you can't really invest into these other new technologies. And you can't
Hmm.
build things that didn't used to be possible because you're basically overcommitting yourself to your customers. So again, it goes back to just being honest with them and upfront and say, hey, this is my vision, this is the business's vision, this is what we want to build with you guys, we want your feedback on these things, here are some ideas for what we're going to build to achieve that vision. And then it's just a conversation, and it really creates a lot of trust between the customer and the business. So I just always go back to
Mm.
just really being customer obsessed and really focused on the customer, because they typically will tell you what they need, not features that they need, but the problems and the opportunities that they have that you can address as a business.
Mm. Mm. I really like that. That's a great attitude. Um, Now, can you share what were some of the toughest decisions you had to make regarding whether to include or exclude some features? Like, were there some examples where you, for example, had to actually decide that this client is no longer staying with us because we actually didn't build that, or we built it somehow differently, and so on? Were there some examples like that in your career where when the decision was really tough?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had a top 30 firm as a customer, and they were requesting us to build new functionality that we did not have. And not only did we not have it, no other customers were going to be using it. It was really just kind of a custom piece of functionality for them. And what we had to do is we just had to sit down and look at the ARR potential that we had from this company, from this firm. Because obviously, listen, if they're willing to pay you 6 or 7 figures, depending on the size of your business, it may make sense just to say, hey, we're not a custom dev shop, but we are going to build this thing to achieve this for this customer, because this gets us some cash flow, and it's going to allow us to continue serving the rest of our customer base, because now, not we've got more cash flow, we can attract more investment. So it's definitely okay to say, hey, we don't normally operate this way, but this does make sense for us, our business right now, and that's an okay situation. But I will say this right now: it's usually a more of a problem whenever it is sales coming to you and they have a prospect, and the prospect is saying, hey, I can't buy your product, you don't have this specific thing. So that's one source of feedback. The second source of feedback is from customer success. We've got an existing customer that needs a new feature, and they're going to churn if we don't build this feature. So what you really have to do in both of those cases is treat them as an idea, going back to that discovery process. This isn't an idea coming from, a customer during discovery. It's an idea coming from a prospect during sales, or from, a customer during implementation from CS. So it's a little bit different of a source, but it still feeds that idea engine. And you just need to treat that just like any other idea. What's the ARR potential? Is there a churn risk? Does this deliver value to the rest of our customer base? What's the reach going to be? So if you're familiar with the RICE kind of scoring model, it's reach, impact, confidence, and effort. You can just treat all of those requests within that framework. And I like to be pragmatic about it. Again, I'm not like a slave to my frameworks. I don't think that that's necessarily a good situation to be in. You need some flexibility. But it's also nice to be able to turn back to those parties and say, hey, you know, this one person is asking for it. I know that it's going to give us a lot of money as a business, but nobody else is going to use it. It's going to be hard to build it. I'm not sure if we can do it. That's not really sounding like something that we can build, right? But if it's something that's like, hey, they just need this new API so they can do things within our application. We don't have the API today, but they need the API. Maybe it's not that difficult to build. We've already got APIs internally that we just need to set to be externally facing. Maybe that makes sense to go ahead and build that, depending on what the revenue potential is. And that was the specific case that I had. Was this firm just wanted more APIs so they could kind of bring us into an ecosystem. We were really just a point solution for them, and they were just consuming our functionality in another user interface. And we found, between just making a couple small modifications to APIs and enabling some optimizations for some iframe functionality within their own user interfaces, we were able to achieve what they were looking for with a pretty small amount of effort. So it made a lot of sense to say, hey, this is for this customer, but this customer A is a big logo for us to have from a product marketing perspective, and B, it's a lot of revenue in the door today. So you kind of just always have to be pragmatic with it, and you know, it, you can't just ignore those kind of edge cases where it may make sense to build things kind of one off for customers.
Hmm. Hmm. I guess it must be difficult sometimes to stay pragmatic when sales is kind of pushing you to deliver some feature, right? That they have really exciting lead in the
That's right.
pipeline, and they're good in selling the idea to you, right? And then So
Yep.
we talked about like building the product with the design lead and the tech lead, but then there's this like environment, right, where you I guess hear the frustration from the customers because like probably customers are not always sharing just the great feedback that everything is working fine and so on, but they would rather focus on what's not working and what would they like to see improved. Then sales is coming that these missing on these features is creating bottlenecks in their pipeline. Tough job you've got your product managers, I guess.
Yeah, well, and you're absolutely right. It's never just all positive feedback. There's going to be bugs. There's going to be things that don't work the way that they thought they did. They saw something work great on a demo. They get in and try to use the product. Wait a minute, this doesn't work the way I thought it did. It needs to do X, Y, and Z. I'm missing this feature. All of that stuff comes up, right? And what I have found is it just goes back to the foundation of trust and transparency. You just need to explain your decision making to sales. You need to be transparent about what you're building and when you're building it. You need to just have a conversation with them. You don't want to kind of be in your own product walled garden. Your customer facing teams, for me, are an incredible source of inspiration and product ideas for what we're building. It's actually something that customer obsessed is number one. I would say customer facing team obsessed is number two. So that would be sales, that would be product marketing, that would be support, that would be CS, that would be implementation teams. All of those groups are going to have different requests for you. And you need to be able to communicate with them all effectively. And how you do that is just through transparency and transparency into how you make your decisions and how you're prioritizing things. If you just tell them no, of course they're going to be upset. They're going to feel like you're not taking what they're saying seriously. But if you can explain to them why what they're asking for, or whatever the prospect is asking for, or the customer is asking for, if you can explain why that's not being done now, maybe it's not necessarily no. It's just, kind of a later thing. Maybe it's something that we work on in the future. But what you can really do is it's called the Moscow method, and this one is a good one to work with customer facing teams. It's the must haves, should haves, could haves, and won't haves. Because you can really go through that prioritization framework with them and say, hey, like, you're asking me for this thing. Is this a must have? Like, can they really not use the application without this thing? Or is this a should have? This is a nice feature that we probably should have to be competitive. Is this a could have? Something that's innovative and better and will help us in the market? Or is this a won't have? Is this something that just sits so far out of our product purview that we don't want to touch it? Like with Appmixer, for example, we're not ever going to build our own integration platform as a service. If a sales guy comes to me and asks me to build that, that's just a won't have. That's something that doesn't fit into our product vision. But there's great applications like you guys out there that we can partner with in a buy situation versus build. So there's kind of trade-offs you can make too throughout that as well. But again, it goes back to trust and transparency. Communicate with them, ruthlessly communicate with them, and proactively communicate with them. Provide them with artifacts that they have available to them. They don't need to send you a Slack message to get everything answered. They don't need to follow up with you on one of their requests. They're able to access that information in a very public way. Again, I'll give another shout out to Jira Product Discovery. I think that they do a very good job of this, just allowing all teams to be able to access the roadmap, understand the prioritization framework, and kind of see where things lie.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I think we covered the part when we were like getting the ideas, the discovery phase, validating them, then getting the say the pushbacks from sales and customer success and your clients. Now let's focus on the development phase. So now you've got specified the next product feature and it goes to development. I guess there are also some challenges that you're facing at that point. I guess developers sometimes are pretty opinionated on how things should be. Right? You say you implement Appmixer or any other product, and they say, well, we could build this in a few days by ourselves, and so on. So, what are the typical challenges you're facing there when you're handing this over to your development team, and how do you work with them?
Yeah, great question. So if I think about it, there's probably 4 challenges that I run into that I would say are very common. The first one is scope creep. So this is something that like, hey, this is what we said we were going to build. Well, suddenly now it's just kind of exploded into this much larger scope than what we first initially agreed to. And that's a challenge from a resourcing perspective because, hey, now you don't have enough folks internally to build what you said you were going to build, which can impact timelines and things of that nature. But it also is just horrible for the morale of the team because they kind of just feel like they're a feature factory, right? If you tell them that we're going to build something, everyone's excited about it, and then it changes. Oh, now we're adding this, and now we're adding that. That can really impact negatively the morale of the team. So just really, really clearly documenting what you're building before you start building it is really important, and that's done in with the tech lead and with the design lead and the product manager. Really having a strict documentation practice of what you're going to build prior to starting. And then really just having a change control process and like communicating the changes to the scope. Why is the scope changing? Being very clear that you understand that this could impact timelines. Because I'm the kind of guy that I don't love working weekends. So I don't love asking people to work weekends. So I'm very, very clear on if we're changing scope, this is what the team agreed to. We need to communicate to the business, hey, this is going to impact timelines and this is why, because we've added X, Y, and Z, and it's going to take us longer to do it. Another one is just technical obstacles. There might be something in your architecture that prevents you from easily delivering what you're saying you're going to build, or maybe a tech vendor that you were going to partner with on a product doesn't pan out the way you were hoping, and there's challenges there. So that's going to happen. There's going to be technical obstacles. And the most important part of that is just kind of having that risk management plan in place so you can really kind of see into the future about what risks may be in play with a specific functionality. This is really very relevant whenever you're talking about things like artificial intelligence and new features of that kind of in that area, because there's going to be things that you find out that you didn't know. And again, it just goes back to being transparent, having full trust with your technology team and your developers and your engineers, and just making sure that there's really, really open lines of communication. And then I'm a huge fan of technical spikes. That's where you have a dedicated time to focus on a technical issue. So instead of just pouring news stories on them, and they don't really have any time to take a step back and making sure that the technology is going to do what they think it's going to do, you allocate specific time to do that technical spike. So they're able to, research and explore and kind of address those technical challenges before they become a problem. The third one is just resource limitations. It's not uncommon that product managers will work with the business and kind of build the idea of what's going to be built. They turn around to their team and they don't have the resources in place to actually deliver on what they said that they were going to build. So that obviously becomes more of a, kind of like a timeline situation where you say, hey, this is the folks that we've got internally. This is how long it's going to take us. It could also not even be resources. It could just be budget. Maybe we don't have the budget to build what we were going to say we were going to build. We were going to invest this much in third-party products from a buy strategy, and what we thought we were going to integrate as a partner is too expensive. So we're kind of resource constrained from a budget perspective. And then you can also be restrained from a technology perspective. Maybe there is a performance issues, or there's not an API available that you thought was going to be there. So those are all kind of resources in a sense that can be challenges as you're going. So that's always something that can come up. And then another one is just simple miscommunication. We thought we were going to build this. The developers and the engineers did not have it communicated to them in an effective way, and we ended up with something that we didn't think we were going to have. So that's another thing that can be a problem, is just making sure that the development team and the engineers are clear on what's being delivered and why. And that again just goes back to being hyper focused on communication. Before you get started, show them the vision, show them the why, explain the value, show them the clickable prototypes, really give them a lot of insight into what they're building instead of just, that one narrow ticket in Jira that they're building. They understand how that fits into the broader vision. And then it's from there, once development is started, stand-ups, kind of those sprint rituals, retros, planning meetings, just constant communications with the developers and the engineers where they can raise issues with you, raise questions. You can monitor progress, not like in a micromanagement way, but just be able to kind of monitor what they're building and make sure that it's achieving. and just making sure that as a product manager, you're involved in that delivery phase. Because some folks in product, just after discovery, hand it off to the tech lead and they're like, hey, go build what we talked about. That's not something that I do. I'm very involved throughout the delivery phase, making sure that we're achieving what we set out to achieve and that we're going to be able to deliver that value to the customers. So that's probably the 4 problems that I would say that I run into most during the development phase.
I really like the idea of like including the developers into a broader vision and representing them. Why do we need that feature? And like maybe back this up with some data on like these customers need it, and this is the percentage of customers that requested that feature, and we're like showcasing how will it work, sharing the prototypes. That's what I wanted to ask you next. You already answered that, like, you know, showing the prototypes that you've built alongside of the clients and saying this is how it should work. And you know, obviously there are some design changes and so on, but yeah, I really like that approach, and I think that there's a lot of companies missing on that. Exactly as you mentioned, like there's just a Jira ticket, right? That is describing the feature. The developer takes it.
Just narrow scope
without a further context.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, they don't have all. The development team will never have all the context you have as a product manager, because I'm talking to the customers, I'm talking to the business, I'm talking to design, I'm talking to the engineers. I have way more context than they do about why we're building what we're building and what we're building. And if they are building the wrong things, that's my fault. That's not their fault. And beyond that, just like the compliance with building what you want to build, developers have great ideas. Like, I'm an engineer myself. You know, I like to think that engineering and development is a highly creative thing that you can do in the world. And they've got great ideas, and they're a source of inspiration too. You know, they're part of that product team. They will be able to point out, hey, you said we were going to do it this way. That might kind of, you know, collide with something that we're already doing elsewhere in the product, and that could impact our customers negatively. They can see around some of those corners because, you know, they've got the full context of the code base. So that is always a really powerful way for me to, you know, kind of source more internal feedback as well. Is engineers and developers. I cannot understate or overstate how important their feedback is too during that process.
Great. All right. So let's get to the end of the road. Actually, beginning of the next road, I guess. So now you've perfected everything. You got the idea. You validated it. Now the feature is developed, and let's assume you've got a new product launch, like some major version, a great upgrade that you want to share with your user base. How do you plan for such product launches? What are some strategies that you use to ensure that it resonates well with the early users that will be using that feature? And are there any key lessons that you've learned from the past product launches? Again, any examples on that, like any successes and failures would be great to share here.
Yes. Yeah. So I'll actually start by answering your last question of some challenges that can come with launch plans or, you know, your product launches. And it goes back to communication with folks external to the product team. So that would be customer facing teams, that would be internal stakeholders of the business, and that would be customers themselves. If you do not communicate what you have built and the value it brings to customers and how it works, you are screwed, because you're going to drop this new functionality in the application. No one's going to know how it works. No one's going to know that it's there potentially. Customer teams are going to be caught on the back foot. And that's something that I've dealt with in previous roles. At, you know, all the companies that I've worked at have had this challenge, because whenever you're developing new product, it's incredibly difficult to keep all of those different stakeholders aligned, right? So to have that kind of clear launch plan that you're confident is going to go well, the first thing that you want to do is really drive alignment. And what I have found is setting kind of clear objectives for this launch. So like, what does success look like from the launch? Are we trying to get new users? Are we trying to drive additional engagement? Is there some other KPI that we're looking at? So it's really important to say, hey, this is kind of like the North Star of this launch, and this is what we're driving to. And just making sure really everyone is super keyed in on that specific direction that we're going. The next one is just making sure that you've got your audiences clear, because we work with a lot of smaller firms, we work with a lot of larger firms, and the messaging and the language between those two cohorts of users can be different because the firms themselves are different. And then the third is just like your channel strategy. Like, where are we launching this thing? Are we doing email marketing? Is it social media? Are we doing industry events? Are we doing blogs on our website? Are we going to do some customer webinars? So really kind of getting clear on what are the activities that are going to come out of this launch, and making sure that everybody in the business is aligned with that is super, super important. And that communication is critical. It's like whenever it comes to the product launch, communication is the number one thing. And it kind of goes back to with marketing, for example. You want to make sure that their messaging about the product is aligning with the value that we're bringing. For sales, you want to make sure that they've got the appropriate materials to be able to, talk about the product and also, demo the product. So they need to be trained on it. Customer support needs to understand how it works so they can answer questions and handle inquiries and, keep providing exceptional service to your customers. So making sure that all of those different customer facing teams are getting what they need is important, because they all need different things. And as the product team, you're responsible for providing them those things. So very, very important. The next kind of step that I like to do in that launch plan, once everybody's clear on this thing is launching, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, here's how we should talk to all of these, individual cohorts, and these are how the different customer facing teams, what they need from us. We kind of go into like the pre-launch phase, and that's where we're really doing some beta programs with our existing customers. So we'll actually launch this thing kind of just to a small segment of beta users, so we can make sure it works the way that we think it does. We can get additional feedback. We can start building up some advocacy, and we can start getting feedback from them or reviews from them, or kind of testimonials or quotes or even case studies. All that stuff is great to get from beta users. During that process where we're doing that beta launch, that's where marketing and product marketing can really help the product team by doing the content creation. So helping, and sometimes like customer teams, there may be like a training team, or like someone that owns the LMS or the learning management system. They can also be involved in this as well. Is the content creation that's required. So that's user guides, tutorials, FAQs, everything that you need to facilitate user onboarding. So there's kind of like this big phase of content that needs to be created around this new product that's been developed by the team. So it's really important to, make sure that everybody's clear on that. And then just kind of creating some buzz in the market, right? Start releasing some teasers, maybe do some press releases. Paid partnerships with influencers is another popular one, or working with associations. In the accounting industry specifically, associations are fantastic. So just kind of like taking care of some of that, like pre-launch activities, really can help the launch be far more effective, because customers and prospects are aware of it. And then your internal stakeholders and your internal teams are all very well prepared, and they're not about to get broadsided. So then it kind of goes to the full launch from there, right? You kind of drop it to everybody. You can maybe still do a staggered rollout where you roll it out to just different cohorts of users as you go, to maybe minimize risk. So if there's, a really large customer that maybe they're not the happiest with you guys all the time, maybe we had a bug for them that we've been working on, and maybe they don't have a ton of trust in the system, for example, dropping brand new product on them is probably not the best idea, right? So if you're not positive that it's working the way that you want it to. So I would always just, really advocate for that slow rollout to different firms. But you also don't want to go so slow that you don't ever get it launched, right? You want there to be like a bookends on that process as well, if that's something you're going to implement. And then once it's been launched, it goes back to using products like Pendo or anything that's giving you product telemetry, even if it's like, Google Analytics or something like that, right? You can really be cheap with this. Just making sure that you're monitoring the usage. Are folks engaging with what you built? Are they using it the way you expected? Are they getting the value from it? Is there user adoption there? And then just keeping them engaged, because again, it goes back to kind of, this is like a flywheel. It's like a factory in a way. I don't want to say feature factory, because that's got a very negative connotation, but we're basically as a team continuously pushing value out to the customers, and you want to make sure that they are remaining updated on those new pieces of value or new pieces of functionality that you're releasing to them, and you want to make sure that they're using it in a way that's bringing value to them. So that kind of goes back to our conversation earlier of just always be watching how customers are using your application, because you're going to capture insights from that. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, Chad, thank you so much. That's been very hands-on, um, very dense, I'd say. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you for sharing this.
you had great questions, Yuri. It
It's
was
been
easy.
you had great answers. So now I've got five more questions, my favorite fives, that I ask to every product manager on this session. So before we call it a day, let me ask you those five now. So the first one is, what's your number one challenge at work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say that it would be the communication with customer facing teams with new product launches. So going back to kind of that last conversation, making sure everyone is aligned on what you're building and why, and making sure that they have the artifacts to effectively do their job. And I break that down, and I broke it down earlier into, sales, support, CS, marketing. If those folks aren't empowered, you're going to have a really hard time as a product organization to get the adoption that you're looking for. So making sure that they have the tools available to them to make sure that they're going to be able to get this product into the hands of new customers and make sure that they're using it effectively is far and away the most challenging thing for me, just because you're dealing with so many different stakeholders and they all need different things, right? And it goes back to the kind of the solution for that problem, or the thing that we're constantly working on and wanting to constantly improve, is just keeping that line of communication open, and making sure that they're able to share and be honest and frank and say, hey, this is working, this isn't working. I would love if you could provide me with XYZ. Just being open to that feedback as a product person is super important.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Great. Now, if you could choose one key metric, the North Star, that defines your success as a product leader, what would that be?
Um, I would say user adoption or customer engagement with key features. Because again, it goes back to, at the end of the day, we want to build product that is viable for the business and valuable for the customer. And if we've built it, it's obviously viable. So we need to make sure that it's valuable. And the only way that we can know that it's valuable is if our customers are using the product and extracting that value on it from it. And it's not like Facebook daily active users or something like that, right? Because we deal with a very seasonal product for one of our products specifically. So the metric itself isn't necessarily like daily usage or anything like that. It's just more of, hey, we need folks to send out 80,000 engagement letters. We want to make sure they're sending out those 80,000 engagement letters and they're getting signed in a timely manner. So just making sure that what they set out to do when they purchase your product is being achieved is the most important thing. So if they need to send engagement letters, make sure the customer is engaging with the engagement letters. If they need to request documents from clients, make sure the documents are being requested and then being uploaded by the client. Those are kind of those are the different areas that I look at in the product, but it's all driven by customer engagement.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Great. We already partially answered the third question. How do you collect feedback from your customers? What processes and tools do you use for that? So you mentioned, well, you're in touch with your customers on regular calls, right? You mentioned you spend about 4 hours a week on calls with your customers. Then you mentioned Pendo multiple times to get the data from on the usage and inside a product. Any other tools or processes that you'd like to mention here?
Yeah, constant communication with the customer success managers or the account managers, because they're a great source of feedback as well. And a lot of times they're getting feedback from the business of our customer. So instead of getting feedback from the direct users or the end users, which is a lot of times what I'm getting feedback from, they're able to give me a higher level view of how we're helping our customers. So having that relationship with the CSMs is incredibly important as well in my process for feedback from customers. So I would say strong relationship with CSMs, um, customer advisory boards or focus groups, whatever you want to call them, to make sure that you're doing continuous discovery on new products and on existing products. And then, like you said, just the product telemetry tools that show user flows, how they're actually engaging with the platform, different events that are taking place. So I would say those are kind of my three favorite tools for collecting feedback. And one really underrated one is just the classic survey. And tools like Pendo and others will allow you to launch a little survey in app, and they can provide you raw feedback in the context of what they're doing. And that can be a really, really powerful tool as well, because instead of getting like a survey monkey in their email and it's completely missing any context of them using the application, the responses to that could be very different than to a feedback survey that they're getting directly in the product when they're using it. So I'm a really big fan of in-app feedback as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Up next, build versus buy. How do you decide?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's always a difficult one because there's a lot of great point solutions out there that are being built that can tackle specific functionality that you're looking to deliver to your customers. And I would say the first thing we need to look at is just like strategic importance. Is this something that's a competitive differentiator for us? If we build this,
Mm-hmm.
is this going to build a moat for us and, not allow others to, just go out and work with that same vendor and kind of replicate the same functionality? So that's one thing that we always look at. Another is just time constraints. If it's something that we need to get to market and by a specific timeline, there's the question of, can we build this effectively in this time frame? If we can't, exploring a buy decision there usually makes a lot of sense. And just like time, another constraint is resources. If we don't have the team to deliver, or we don't have the skill set to deliver what we're wanting to do, for example, with some like an IDP platform, intelligent document processing, you may not have a resource internally that has the skill set to build a functional IDP product. So it might make sense for you to go out and buy that application to help. And then it's really just a cost analysis. Let's say we don't have any time constraints, we don't have any, resource constraints. Does it make sense for us to build this versus license it from a third party? So that's kind of always something that you want to balance as well, because if you're building it, you're stuck with the long-term maintenance and scalability of that thing. So there's the initial investment of developing it and the long-term investment of maintaining it. And that doesn't even include all the new features you might need to build as you go. In a buy scenario, you obviously have a partner that it's their full-time job to build and maintain this thing, this external tool that you're using. So that's always a really important thing to look at, is if we want to build it, we can't just treat it as it's this time investment today. There's also a long-term investment as well on the maintenance side. And then compliance is another big one. So we deal with a lot of sensitive PII, personally identifiable information. So you got to be careful with working with third parties. It might not make sense to work with third parties from a compliance perspective. So that's also something that you want to play a role in. And then just the integration capabilities of that partner. If they've got fantastic APIs and it's just a seamless build or seamless integration, it can make a lot of sense, just to kind of that time to value conversation that we had earlier. But if there's just not really a great partner out there that has a functional product with great APIs that you can integrate with seamlessly, again, it kind of maybe you would lean more towards the buy.
I see. And the final question is, what role do integrations with third-party products play in your product?
Just a tremendous importance. A lot of our firms are using legacy tax and audit applications, as well as more modern ERP systems. And there is a lot of data in those applications that drive a lot of behaviors inside of Aiwyn. So we're a practice management solution and a client portal solution. There's obviously a lot of data locked up in those applications that we need in our application. And we're not going to build an audit platform today, for example, So having those integrations are super important for us, because they're going to be working in those apps. And for us to achieve our vision, which is, highly automated practices, we need to be able to pull that data into our application and allow them to use it in the context that they need to for practice management. There's also situations where, maybe it's just a really strong best of breed solution or a point solution that we aren't going to be able to displace effectively within the firm, because a lot of times, they'll operate as different businesses across the firm in their different departments. So tax, audit, and advisory may have, completely different tech stacks that they're working with. And instead of trying to come in and replace all of these different apps across all of these different departments, it can be highly strategic to come in and say, hey, we're actually going to integrate with that specific application because it's really embedded into the department. They don't want to get rid of it. But maybe we want to create that unified client experience, so we need to pull that data in so the client can see requests from a third-party tool, for example. So that's a really important area as well. And then CRMs is another one that's always great to pull in. They love, with practice management, having the full context of the relationship with their client. And we're not going to build HubSpot. We're not going to build Salesforce. So integrations like that usually make a lot of sense. So I typically look at it in 3 buckets. There's the core applications, ERP, tax, audit. There's the CRM, and then there's best of breed point solutions that are specific to departments. And those are kind of the 3 areas that we really focus on for from our integration perspective.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Chet, for joining me for this episode. I think this was a great session. And best of luck to you and to Aiwyn and to all the other product managers out there who gave this a listen. Well, thanks once again, and take care, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Yuri. It was a pleasure to join you today, and thank you, everybody, for listening.